So I'm a geologist. What was most interesting to me, and this is what I looked at initially, was the weathering and erosion on the Sphinx. Here is a view from the air, a few people for scale, and very important to me is this weathering on the Sphinx enclosure walls and the body of the Sphinx. And the core body, what I call the core body, this portion, shows a very specific type of weather. Very clear geologically. I've spoken to literally hundreds of geologists about this at geological conferences. Everyone agrees with me geologically that these walls, this rounded profile, you see the rounded profile? That is from water beating down on it, rainwater running down the rocks. And I want to make a quick point right now. It is not from rising Nile floods. And sometimes people say to me, well, maybe the floods came and it rose up and did this weathering. No, that would show a different pattern geologically. It would show much more undercutting. This is from rainwater coming down, torrential rains from rainfall runoff, and it's quite clear. But the problem is, where does the Sphinx sit? It sits on the edge of the Sahara Desert. We know geologically how old the Sahara Desert is. We know it's at least 5,000 years old. 5,000 years, you're talking 3,000 BC or so. When did the Egyptologists say the Sphinx was carved from scratch? 2,500 years. So there's a discrepancy there. There's a problem there. Does that make sense? So you see this is just a diagram to show how the water would run off and cut little gullies and give this rounded profile. Here's a younger me standing there. And notice, this is not a little bit of weather. This is an incredible amount of weather on what are actually fairly hard, fairly competent limestones. They're not limestones that you would call, that Michelangelo would, carve a David out of. They're not that high quality, but they're not horrible limestones either, to sort of be colloquial. I mean, they're fairly hard, competent, good limestone. Here I am in one of the cracks that opens up along weaknesses, but again, it's cut out by water. It's actually sort of classic karst topography geologically. Here's another view, some more views. That is does everyone see the tail of the Sphinx there? That's John Anthony was standing for scale. And look at this. You see that was a gully that was actually cut out and filled in dynastic times. It was cut out by water erosion much earlier. The dynastic Egyptians apparently filled it in. Here we can see the rain erosion. Here is what you find, what you would expect if the Sphinx were only 2,500 BC, only 4,500 years old. You would expect wind erosion that gives a pattern like this. In both cases, you think of a layer cake. You have harder and softer layers. The softer layers erode out preferentially, but they give a very different pattern. Can everyone see that? Here's just a diagram to show how the wind sort of cuts it out. Here is younger me looking at wind erosion. Can you see the difference? Here I am showing the wind erosion. You have this sort of desert varnish and patina. You cut out the softer layers. Look at this. This is what I call wind tunnel effect. There's something amiss here. That the Sphinx did not conform to the climate that we know has been in North Africa and Egypt for the last 5,000 years, that the evidence geologically, despite what the Egyptologists were telling us, indicated the Sphinx had to go back to this earlier period when it was much more moist, much more rainfall, much more temperate, and would give the type of weathering we see on the actual Sphinx. And not only did it have to go back to that earlier period, but it had to go considerably back into it to give the level of erosion that we see. Sometimes Egyptologists will say to me, oh, it still rains in Giza, you still have flash floods, somehow these flash floods are going to cause a meter worth of erosion on solid limestone. Just doesn't work. I have been there when it rains. you know, it's rare, but I've seen rain on the Giza Plateau in the present day. That's not what we're talking about.